night and good morning, wherever you are. So, as a good video saying, it's much more of a compilation of a topic called money, money, cash, banking system, trade, Federal Reserve, government, central bank. यसको बारेमा यो भिडियो चाहिँ खास अनि यो भिडियोमा चाहिँ मैले खास मेरो एम भनेको के हो भन्दाखेरि the thing that we are taught in school, in colleges, in universities are monetized by the government or education board. तर जुन कुरा चाहिँ रियालिटीमा हुन्छ, the one that's real, that's the one that's happening right now, they are hiding the truth from us. They are propagating a big fraud, a big fraud to all the humanity. And banking system is the only one system that controls everything, from pharmaceutical industry to the political leader to corporations to entertainment, Hollywood, Bollywood, Collywood, Trollywood, whatever you want it. It is all governed by banking system. The thing is, where did the banking system come in? How does it work? Where did the money go? What is money, to be honest with you? Because humanity has been here in earth from civilization to civilization, centuries from centuries. They used to trade, they used to live their lifestyle, they used to have civilization, communities, and they used to exchange wealth. But the cash money, the cash flow, or the digital asset, the banking system, it's been of this century. These are of this century, or let's just say 200 to 300 years old. But who started it? How did it all start? And what is happening right now as we speak? Nobody knows. You know why? Because everyone is busy on their work to earn money, but they don't know what to do with the money. Do they need the money? They don't. And I'll give you the shortest definition of money, wealth, and bank. Let's just say, what is money in a common and general language? Something that is used as a medium to buy or sell your wealth, your asset, thing that you need to fulfill your necessity in society, making it a standard of something so that we can exchange, we can live, we can eat, we can, have our community grow or have our lifestyle fulfilled. But how does it work? How did it all start? And how are the people of this world trying to brainwash everyone, making God as one of the religion, or let's just say money as God, equivalent to God? A piece of paper by itself doesn't have any value. You add a value to a piece of paper. Because the money can be printed, or cash money can be printed anywhere, all around the world. Nobody's going to know. But what gives is the value? What is it that gives you the value? It's the people. It's the attention. It's the government. It's the system that we taught in school, in colleges, that teaches us to value money. To value money. And there are people rushing, fighting, killing, sneezing everyone just for a piece of paper, never knowing the value of it. If you know a value, everything is money, everything is wealth. But if you don't know the value, a piece of paper will be the only thing that you work for, only thing that you know. And that's what they want you to know, that a piece of paper is everything. It can buy you health, it can buy you product, it can buy you money, cars, houses, buses, everything. But look in the deeper way. Look beneath the curtain. Look beneath the education system. Just for a second. Just for this hour. This mad guy. This stupid guy. This weirdo. Listen to this weirdo. Just for 1 hour. I have compiled a video expressing what is money, how it has been installed in our brain as a godly religion, how the United States, in this video I'm taking United States as an example, but everywhere around the world, under the same law, same democracy, and under United Nations under United States or United Nations. They have all the same system, how they works, how the money works, how the financial system works, how the banking system works. They're all the same. So I'm trying to connect with all people all around the world and making pointing to the moon, or pointing, hey brothers, hey sisters, hey friend, this might be also a case. I'm making this video for education purpose. I don't want to earn any money. I don't have any, let's just say, advantageous thinking for this video. This is for my friends, my family, my brothers, my sisters, and people to come to understand the system, understand the indoctrination, to understand the real wealth, the real value of money, the real money, what is the meaning of money. Not just having a cash in your bank pocket or in your wallet and saying I'm rich. I'm trying to point out what richness means, what real value or real wealth means, and what is happening right now as we speak, and who started it, how it is happening all over the world, and why it is happening. Because whether you like it or not, our earth is small. We live in a so much beautiful existence. This room is so much beautiful, so much to explore, so much to say, so much mystery behind it. And if you could just take out money off it, everything is magical, mystery. And maybe we can live as a balanced being with fulfilling our necessity, not entangled in money orientation, but life orientation, to help people to live and to know who you are, to live life in synchronicity with nature. But because of the banking system, pharmaceutical industry, and other propaganda, people are brainwashed. They have been brainwashed with credit cards, debit cards, cryptos, and other marketing strategies. They forgot what it really meant, where it all started, what was the value. So please do watch it. I'll add and cover up as much as I can, but please do watch all of them. Pause it if necessary, rewire it, replay it whenever you're free. Please do watch in full. Thank you. Don't forget to like and comment.
The first central bank began in Holland. Then the second one was in Sweden in 1688, the Bank of England, and then a number of other banks that brought us up to 1882. However, in December 24th, 1913, the Federal Reserve Bank here in the United States was formed. Now, I think it's very important that we take a look at the organizational chart of the United States from 1776 until December 23rd, 1913. We had the Constitution, we had the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, and part of the executive branch was the Treasury. When the Federal Reserve Act was passed, there was this other entity that started to have control over our government. Passed on December 24th, 1913 at 11:45 p.m. by a small group of greedy
learned, the more I realized I was lied to. We're taught to go to school, to get a degree, to get a job, so we can then get a job and climb the corporate ladder. But wealthy people don't do that. If the banks lived by their own advice, which is save money, the banks would be losing money. When you go and deposit $1,000 in the bank, that cash that you deposited is a liability for the bank. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money away from your pocket. So when the bank has your cash, it's a liability for them. They want to get rid of it as fast as possible. And the way they do that is by lending it out because it's an investment for the bank. They don't want to hold on to cash, but they want you to save your money.
Wake up, everybody! Things that we were told growing up were a lie. See, when I did my research and educated myself, I felt like I was in the Matrix taking that red pill.
You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
I encourage everyone to do the research, and you'll be surprised what you find.
McDonald's is a last name. Abercrombie and Fitch, last names. Armani is a last name. Baskin Robbins is a last name. Chrysler, Pillsbury, Porsche, Procter & Gamble, 2 last names. Rolls Royce, Charles Rolls, Henry Royce, last name. Versace, last name. Wells Fargo, Henry Wells, William Fargo, last name. Walgreens, Wrigley's, Welch's Grape Juice, last name. Here you are, you think you're buying a product. You are not buying a product, you're buying a name. You think you're wearing a product. Hey, look at this product. No, you're saying, look at this family. So you done went to one family called Wells Fargo and got $200,000 so you can go to another family called Rolls Royce so you can give them money to get yourself a car so you can go back to the hood and see the Joneses and say, look at what I got. Meanwhile, Wells Fargo, their family's sitting up being rich, and Harley Davidsons and Rolls Royce are being rich, and the Joneses are sitting there holding up people's stuff saying, look at what we did and we broke.
Well, I have a sort of suggestion, and that is this, that before we decide either to save the planet or to destroy it, we pause for a moment of silence. I don't mean that kind of grim silence which one observes when somebody says, such and such a famous person has just died, and we'll observe a moment of silence in his honor. And everybody frowns and thinks very serious thoughts. That's not silence at all. I mean real silence, in which we stop thinking and experience reality as reality is. Because after all, if I talk all the time, I can't hear what anyone else has to say. And if I think all the time, and by that I mean specifically talking to yourself subvocally inside your skull, if I think all the time, I have nothing to think about except thoughts. And so I'm never in touch with the real world. Now, what is the real world? Some people have the theory that the real world is material or physical. I say it's made of kind of a stuff. Other people have the theory that the real world is spiritual or mental. But I want you to point out that both those theories of the world are concepts. They are constructions of words. And the real world is not an idea. It is not words. Reality is you will find, therefore, that if you get with reality, all sorts of illusions disappear. And I will mention several illusions that have not this kind of existence. Let's begin with some very down-to-earth ones, like money. Money is a very useful method of accounting. It is a measure of wealth in the same way as inches are measures of length and grams measures of weight. You cannot eat money. You could have a fantastic quantity of dollar bills and stock certificates on a desert island, and they would be useless to you. What you would need would be food and animals. and companions. Money simply represents wealth in rather the same way that the menu represents the dinner. Only we are psychologically perverted in such a way that some of us would rather have money than real wealth. But you know, you cannot drive in 5 cars at once, even though they be Cadillacs. You cannot live simultaneously in 6 houses or eat 12 roasts of beef at one meal. There is a limit to what one can consume. So that's one of the sort of confusions I'm talking about. Another is that we confuse ourselves as living organisms with our idea of ourselves. That is to say, with a conception of myself which is called the personality or ego. That is what we have been told we are. And it's an extremely crude and limited conception of oneself, of the actual, unique living organism. And we get unhappy because we're thinking of ourselves in this way, because we think, well, gee, I'm going to die. I once talked to a woman who came to me and said she was afraid of death. And we went into it in a long conversation. I said, what are you really afraid of? And she thought it over, and he said, do you know, what I'm going to be afraid of is what other people are going to say. They're going to say, poor old Gert, she couldn't last it through. Because you see, who you think you are is entirely dependent on who people have told you you are. You're not that. Then another thing that bothers us is time. Most people nowadays say, I have no time. Of course you don't. Because you are not aware of the present. You know, the present is represented on your watch by a hairline that is as thin as possible as is consistent with visibility. And so everybody thinks the present is, instead of, now, the present is the only real time. There is no past, and there isn't a future. And there never will be. We think ordinarily of the present as an infinitesimal point at which the future changes into the past. And we also do a terrible thing. We imagine ourselves to be results of the past. And we're always passing the buck over our shoulders, like when God approached Adam in the Garden of Eden and said, hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat? And Adam said, this woman thou gavest me, she tempted me and I did eat. And God looked at Eve and said, hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat? And she said, the serpent beguiled me and I did eat. And God, out of the corner of his eye, looked at the serpent. The serpent said nothing. So you see, we're always passing the buck. And don't realize that the past is caused by the present, as the wake of a ship flows back from the prow. Now, the wake doesn't drive the ship any more than the tail wags the dog. But we've all got excuses. My mother had a fit while she was carrying me in the womb. They didn't bring me up right. And then they go to the mother and say, how is it that you could have been so irresponsible with your children? And she says, well, it was my parents who didn't bring me up right either. And so everybody passes the buck. But the truth of the matter is, it all begins here. This is where the creation begins. And you're doing it and won't admit it. Because, of course, you're all God in disguise. Jesus found that out, and they crucified him for saying so. So this is a very odd thing for Westerners to understand, and particularly for Americans. Because we are so fixated on the future. When we say we want to put something down, we say it has no future. Well, do you? Much better to have a present. Because if you don't, it's useless to make plans. Because when they work out, you won't be there to enjoy them. You'll be thinking of something else. So we realize that we are living out of now and throwing the past behind us. The confusion of money in any form whatsoever with wealth is one of the major problems from which civilization is suffering.
I've often said that I wished people could realize all their dreams and wealth and fame, and so that they could see that it's not where you're going to find your sense of completion.
But our culture, our civilization, is entirely hung up on the notion that money has an independent reality of its own.
As a Beatle, we made it, and there was nothing to do. We had money, we had fame, and there was no joy.
I believe that I had to become a famous idea and get all the stuff that people dream about, accomplish a bunch of things that look like success in order to give up my attachment to those things.
One might say then that we are confused through and through about what we mean by the material world. In the first place, we confuse abstract symbols, that is to say numbers and words and formulae, with physical events, as we confuse money with consumable wealth.
Are you a rich man?
When you mean rich, what you mean?
Do you have a lot of possessions? A lot of money in the bank?
Possession make you rich? I don't have that type of richness. My richness is life, forever.
We are thinking about vast abstractions, ideologies called communism, capitalism, all these systems, and paying less and less attention to the world of physical reality, to the world of earth and trees and waters, people.
I think all our society is run by insane people for insane objectives. You know? And I think that's what I sussed when I was 16 and 12 way down the line. It's the same thing I'm expressing all the time, but now I can put it into that sentence that I think we're being run by maniacs for maniacal ends, you know.
The one thing we dying for, nothing but pain, stuck in this game, searching for fortune and fame.
We're all familiar with the anecdotal examples of people winning lotteries, lottos, football pools and deteriorating because wealth in itself has no meaning. We are all aware too of the native and indigenous tales that regard the accumulation of material products as a kind of disorder. We live in a sick society where we've prioritized materialism over idealism. We have no values or principles. We have people racing to the conclusion of an argument that has no values, no deep truth in it. We have people spending their whole lives acquiring fortunes that they're never going to use, don't need, that are meaningless, that can never fulfill them. A materialistic life as well is a commitment to the idea that there is no deeper ulterior meaning. The only thing that matters is the acquisition of objects, accruing more material, accruing more power, accruing more resources. If that becomes your ideology, because ultimately, fundamentally, it isn't true, because there is a realm beyond the reach of the senses that we are nevertheless impacted by, our consciousness itself resourced from this deep well, you are living in an illusion with every object you purchase. You are living in a nihilistic space, a place desiccated of the richness of meaning, a dry, barren landscape papered over with privilege. One of the things I've been granted by my own limited experiences of fame and fortune is that it is dumb, empty, inane. I have announced my apostasy many times. Celebrity can't fulfill you. It's a peculiar religion. Wealth, privilege, these are odd ideologies, and they embed themselves in you. It's so difficult to free yourself from the toxicity of it once you've experienced it. I'm not asking for sympathy. Of course I'm not. I'm describing the situation.
And the principle is that any time you, as it were, voluntarily let up control, in other words, cease to cling to yourself, you have an access of power. Because you're wasting energy all the time in self-defense, trying to manage things, trying to force things to conform to your will. The moment you stop doing that, that wasted energy is available. And therefore, you are, in that sense, having that energy available, you are one with the divine principle. You have the energy. When you're trying, however, to act as if you were God, that is to say, you don't trust anybody and you're the dictator and you have to keep everybody in line, you lose the divine energy. Because what you're doing is simply defending yourself. So then, the principle is, the more you give it away, the more it comes back.
Most of us are trying to make the big bank account, but very few people are working on developing themselves. But the more you develop yourself, the more you tap into what you already have in you, the more you work on your creativity, the more you work on your unique voice, the more you understand what's unique about you. So you have in you these abilities. And most of the time we ignore that because we're trying to get the money in the bank versus actually raise our value, our understanding of ourselves, our uniqueness, our creativity, what your skills are, what is so unique about you that makes you not replaceable. Now, the more you do that, the more the entire bank account system could totally collapse and you'll still be fine because you're capable of bringing value to the world that's beyond just money. You're bringing value to the world and you'll be taken care of for that. So one of the most important things you can do is work on you, not work on just filling the bank account. And if you have a decent bank account or a medium bank account or even a very little one, use that to work on you. Develop your creativity, create a studio, go to things that will help you learn more about you. There are so many things that are worth so much money in you, but most of us ignore those things and try to get the external. And that's the shortcut that stops you from meeting what's nuts about you, what's insane about you, what's original about you. And every person has such a brilliant, unique, original thing, and very few people invest in themselves. You have that. You have that in you. Every person has that, but their focus is on the wrong thing. It's on how do I get money versus how do I raise my value, not my bank account's value, my value. You are an infinite supply. You are the apple tree, and your job is to access that.
See, that fact that everything is in decay is your helper. That is allowing you that you don't have to let go because there's nothing to hold on to. It's achieved for you, in other words, by the process of nature. So once you see that you just don't have a prayer, and it's all washed up, and that you will vanish and leave not a rack behind, and you really get with that, suddenly you find you have the power. This enormous access of energy. But it's not power that came to you because you grabbed it. It came in entirely the opposite way. And power that comes to you in that opposite way is power with which you can be trusted. We are recognized by the fact that one day you face the same way as you did the day before. And people recognize your facing. So they say that's John Doe or Mary Smith. But actually the contents of your face, whatever they may be, the water, the carbons, the chemicals, are changing all the time. And everything is like that. It's pattern. And this is why it's so spiritual. To be non-spiritual is not to see that, to identify with the body. The body is really very intangible. And so therefore, if you cling to the body, you will be frustrated. The material world, the world of nature, is marvelous, so long as you don't try to lean on it, so long as you don't cling to it. And if you don't cling to it, you can have a wonderful time with it. If you try to possess people, then of course you are trying to cling to the physical world. So one might say then that we are confused through and through about what we mean by the material world. In the first place, we confuse abstract symbols, that is to say numbers and words and formulae, with physical events, as we confuse money with consumable wealth. In the second place, we confuse physical events with matter. But matter, you see, is an idea, it's a concept. It's the concept of stuff, of something solid and permanent that you can catch hold of. Now, you just can't catch hold of the physical world. The physical world is the most evasive, elusive process that there is. It will not be pinned down, and therefore it fulfills all the requirements of spirit. So what I'm saying then is that the non-abstract world is the spiritual world. But we're all hooked on the idea that there is, you see, an external objective world, which is a certain way. But people always have to feel that they've got to find a meaning. For example, you get sick, and you've lived a very good life, and you've been helpful to other people and done all sorts of nice things. Then you get cancer. And you say to the clergyman, why did this have to happen to me? And you're looking for an explanation, and there isn't one. It just happened that way. But people feel if they can't find an explanation, they feel very, very insecure. Why? Because they haven't been able to straighten things out. The world is not that way. It is you, in other words, who evoke the world, and you evoke the world in accordance with what kind of a you are, what kind of an organism. One organism evokes one world, another organism evokes another world. And so everything, reality is a kind of relationship. So Once one gets rid of the idea of the truth as some way the world is in a fixed sense, say it is that way, see? Then you get to another idea of the truth altogether. The truth that cannot be pinned.
Ah, you didn't realize, huh? Well, don't blow a gasket on me or anything. Chill, okay? Ready? Money is God. And you thought that religion is just the Christians, Buddhists, shamans. Of course it isn't. You're not that stupid. In this day and age, the only universal religion is money. The different currencies are like Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, Buddhism. Look, in essence, money is your God. Everyone believes in it, it's the source of everything, and it can even work miracles from time to time. Wow. This God has apostles, millionaires, whose sacred lives you examine with such enthusiasm. Each of you regularly takes the sacrament of communion, receiving an envelope that contains a piece of the holy flesh. Ah. Just for shits and giggles, go ask anyone, how much money do you make? They'll crap themselves like you asked them to confess their gravest. And all of those crisp little bills, they're icons. These bills, they are not just some old pieces of paper printed with ink. No, they are nothing less than the body of your God. They are born in a sacred place no mere mortal can enter. Then these godly pieces of paper come into human hands. And then, tired, wrinkled, and dirty, they are burned in special furnaces to rise again like the phoenix, that they may walk their earthly path once more. Everyone touches them. Take out your wallet for a sec. Imagine the journey each bill had to take to end up right there in your sticky little hand. Who was the first to crinkle it? And where is it going next? A bum? A syphilitic? A prostitute? The president? And yourself? You all practice sacraments with the same scraps of paper. People, wake up. All this money circulates in order for you to give it your precious energy. See, money's value is backed by labor. Without you in the mix, money has no meaning. The fact is, money is nothing but the product of a regular printing press. Anybody, anywhere, could print their own money. Of course, it will not be backed by the collective unconscious, but by an individual. You were divided so that they may rule. Money's common property, sure, but yours is yours and mine is mine, right? Money costs a great deal. People cost nothing, because you're priceless. Since you have proved that you can make a god from any old myth, and you're ready with you. I'm just an animated character with a funny voice, while you're an actual, real-life person. With your intellect and your experience, you're practically a god. All my verbalized thoughts definitely fall woefully short of your fancy inquiring mind's research. Whatever I spew on here could be said better by you, my friend, but you just don't need to. You can express your public stances by simply clicking the like button or with a smug comment. So what? And take notice that no one will dare to reproach you with dialectic relativism. Definitely no one will reproach you with that. It must be awesome being you. There once was a wise old teacher. He was so great that people didn't even understand what they could learn from him. Some said he used to be some kind of filthy rich and powerful businessman, but then he forsook the vanities of the world after realizing the true nature of life. And then one seeker, the very bravest of all of them, comes to him and says, "Oh, great and wise teacher, I'm disappointed in this world. It's rotten to the very core. Help me obtain the vision of truth, please." And then the teacher answered,
Okay. I shall impart to thee the truest knowledge.
But first, could you help me out by bringing me a gizmo that can be the most amazing thing? And the teacher whispered something right.
The most valuable currency in the world is the currency of human attention.
Well, I've gone and struck the mother lode.
And you? Have you brought me a coin?
The Federal Reserve System, to most people, seems like it is a agency of the federal government. That's what I thought it was when I first started to research this topic. But it turns out that it's nothing of the kind. The Federal Reserve is a hybrid organization. It's a partnership between the federal government and the private banks. When you look at it deeper than that, its essence is neither as a government agency or a private company. In reality, it is a cartel.
The American Revolutionary War began as the American colonies sought to detach from England and its oppressive monarchy. Though many reasons are cited for the revolution, one in particular sticks out as the prime cause: that King George III of England outlawed the interest-free, independent currency the colonies were producing and using for themselves, in turn forcing them to borrow money from the Central Bank of England at interest, immediately putting the colonies into debt. And, as Benjamin Franklin later wrote, the refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution. In 1783, America won its independence from England. However, its battle against the central bank concept and the corrupt, greed-filled men associated with it had just begun. So what is a central bank? A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it.
So you have to get an annual shot. I mean, it hasn't been formally announced yet, so you don't want to rile everyone up. The drug companies, the food companies, the vaccine companies, they pay us hundreds of millions of dollars a year to hire and keep the reviewers to approve their products. If they can get every person required at an annual vaccine, that is a recurring return of money going into their company.
So how do you know it's already getting approved?
Well, they're not going to, just from everything I've heard, they're not going to not approve this.
Meet Christopher Cole, an executive officer at the FDA with over 20 years experience.
Meets Mr. Freedom Stick. He states, hell to the fuck no. You want proof that this wasn't about your health and safety and it was strictly about an agenda and money? There's your proof.
From the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this. By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push, once again, legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very weary of such an institution, so they needed to create an incident to affect public opinion. So, J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors that a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria, which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing the recipients to sell their property, and thus a spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions, and turmoil emerged. Putting the pieces together a few years later, Frederick Allen of Life magazine wrote, "The Morgan interests took advantage to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed." Unaware of the fraud, the Panic of 1907 led to a congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission, led by Aldrich, recommended a central bank should be implemented so a panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark the international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge, that the 10 or so figures who attended were told they could only use their first names in addressing each other.
This dollar bill has value because it is based on your physical body. Your flesh and blood body backs up the authority of this money. If you're an American, this money is backed up by your body. Now let me show you how. When you look at the front of the dollar bill, you will see on each side are serial numbers for this particular dollar bill, are serial numbers. If you look on the back of your Social Security card, you will see the numbers on the bottom. The numbers on the bottom, usually in red, represent your blood on the New York Stock Exchange. It represents your physical body. That's why the numbers are in red, representing your blood. Now, when you take the numbers on the Social Security card and put it next to the serial numbers on the dollar bill, you will see it's the same sequence of numbers and letters. And so what it's actually telling you is that there's like whatever the amount is, 24 million or 4 million or $6 million, whatever it is that your body is worth on the New York Stock Exchange, there's that much money out there all over the world in fives and tens and hundreds with your Social Security number on it. So these numbers line up exactly correct the same way. The numbers can be in blue, black, or red. And so this is why years ago, we used to say the government is just going to beat you black and blue. Because black and blue are colors that are used in banking. You have to sign with a blue or black pen. Or you can sign with a red pen, which represents your blood. Your physical body is really very important to the corporation called the United States Corporation. That again is why they want you to wear your seat belt and have insurance, and in case something does happen to you, you need to have insurance. Why? Because the government doesn't want to pay for you to be in a hospital. They want you out making money for them. They don't have to put the money in to protect you in a hospital. Go get your own insurance. Let them pay for it. The real powers behind banking today in America is insurance companies. Insurance companies are the most powerful hand behind the world of money because it has something to do with the 14th Amendment. and how we were changed over from sovereignty, man, woman, and child, into a U.S. citizen.
To ask a key question as taxpayers, as parents, as educators, and the question is, what is school for? We keep running this multi-billion-dollar operation, trillion-dollar operation, but we don't ask what it's for. I know what it used to be for. What it used to be for was to train obedient factory workers. We didn't have enough, so we built this system on purpose to train kids to sit for 9 hours, to do what they were told, to learn how to use a number 2 pencil, and on, right? Yes. And it worked. We got plenty of factory workers who were compliant, who would put up with all sorts of nonsense in a dark room for 8 hours for a paycheck once a week. We also taught people how to consume, because that was the other big problem. In 1920, the average kid owned 2 pairs of pants and 1 pair of shoes, right? You don't know a human being who owns 2 pairs of pants and 1 pair of shoes anymore, because we needed to train people to fill their closets with stuff, and we did that at school. So what is school for now?
The United States. Which is the most powerful family? I know which one you're going to say, and it'll be wrong.
You want everyone to think Rothschild, or everybody's going to say Rothschilds, and you're saying there's somebody above them.
Oh, yeah. The other one is the Rockefellers. Everyone says, oh, it's the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Rothschilds.
Who is it?
No, it's the Collins family. Now, who are the Collins? Well, there's a fellow called Christopher Columbus, who in Spanish is called Cristobal Colón. Now, he came from one of the papal families called the Colonna family. And they were the enemies of the Orsini family, who considered themselves to be the Maxima family. The Rothschilds and the Windsors come from the Orsini family. So does Tom Cruise, by the way. He's an Orsini. So the Orsini and the Colonna were fighting in the Middle Ages to be popes, and they were killing each other. There was assassinations, blood on the street, there were coups. Anyway, one pope finally comes along in history and says, right, you've got to stop this killing and fighting amongst yourselves. And that he said, one of your family has to marry one of their family, and you have to make amends, and we have to make a papal bull, and we have to work together. And from then on, the Collins family, whom are also called the Cohens, the Jewish Cohens, the priests, the Levites, the Cohens, the Collins, the Colon, becomes Columbia, District of Columbia, the Knights of Columbus, Columbia Pictures, British Columbia, Columbia in South America, and the Collins family still runs America. Thank you, Christopher Collins, otherwise known as Christopher Columbus.
They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest. But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, "Here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up." Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, "Hey, thanks for that." And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created, called bank credit, in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, They are still currency, so now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely the symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time, but we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value. But here comes the really cruel joke. We work hard so that we can save some of that currency, so that we can pay the tax collector. In the United States, it's known as the IRS. They then turn it over to the Treasury so that the Treasury can pay the principal plus interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. Now let's do a recap on this section, because this is where the system begins to rob you and I on a massive scale. Much of our taxes are not used for schools, roads, and public services, but to pay interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud. But here's one of the biggest secrets of them all. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, there was no need for personal income tax. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and that very same year, the Constitution was amended to allow income tax. Do you really think this was just a coincidence? Ask yourself how much income tax you've paid over your lifetime. Much of it has been silently siphoned away into the hands of those who own the system. Yes, this system has owners. Who they are is an even bigger secret that we'll get to shortly. But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe $4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue, and that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The Founding Fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt, but now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money for the simple fact that you can't print them. Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. They're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme. It is a Ponzi scheme. Fraud. It is a pyramid scheme. It is a Ponzi scheme. It's a scam and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say, the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check from nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system at first glance. Very few people do. It is purposely complex. The economist John Maynard Keynes once wrote, "By this means, government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." I believe that presented correctly, anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is.
Do you know why they tell you to save money? Because the system of banking has nothing to do with communism or capitalism. It's the banks run the world. The rich run the world. They don't care if you're communist or capitalist. So let's say you save $1 US or €1, 1 yen. The banking system can lend out 10. So the entire system is called the fractional reserve system. The fractional reserve system is also printing money. And then they tell you to save money. So they want you to save money so they can lend out your money 10 times. So your dollar became worthless 10 times over. And then they used to pay you 10% interest on your money. Now it's at best 1%. And they're still lending it out 10 times. So that's why you don't save money, is because your money is becoming worth less and less and less and less and less. The banks are getting richer and richer and richer. Then they tax you on that interest they pay you. That 1% interest, if they pay you that much. Japan is 0. That's what I would question. So how come that happens? So when they lend out money, that's how money